Hi, I've never done a Zoom meeting or an Air Meet before. Excuse me. My name is Christina Minear, and when I'm not screwing up presentations, I'm the Director of Partnerships for Washington Technology Industry Association. Our mission is building a strong, sustainable tech sector and a thriving community, and we are so glad that you have joined us here this evening. First, I wanted to thank our sponsors for the Founder Speaker Series, Perkins, Coie, and Clark Nuber. Their contributions make programs like this possible, and we do several of them over the course of the year, so please keep up with us. Here we have, I'd like to introduce Dave Parker. He's a 5-time founder, having sold 3 and closed 2. He's the author of the recently released book, Trajectories, Startup Ideation to Market Fit to Product/Market Fit, a handbook for founders and anyone supporting them. And he's the chair of the WTIA startup programs. Dave, please take it away from me. Thank you.
Thanks. Good luck with the Star Wars movie in the background. So that's a good reason to be on mute, right? So, well, thanks to the WTIA team. And thanks for joining us. This is our first one. So it's a lot like going to Clubhouse, except for the fact that you actually have us on video. So you got that going for you. So we'll get a chance to bring people on stage later. But first off, Dave, introduce our guest. So this is fun for me because Dave and I have known about each other and we've been around the community together. But it's a good chance for me to get to hang out with Dave actually, and ask some questions. So other than being our new WTIA board chair of the big board. Tell us a little bit about what you're working on these days, Dave, and a little bit about you.
Well, as the chair of the WTIA, I also work at a weed company. So, which is fascinating to think that, like, the WTIA is
the cause and effect issue.
Exactly. It's headed by somebody who works in weed. So no, I'm the chief product officer at Leafly, which is a cannabis marketplace here located in Seattle, where I guess more virtually now. But so I head up product and technology there, and I was kind of counting the years. I think I've been in the industry now 27 years. Started back in the day, first day at Microsoft, DOS 6 released. Disk doubler, and people were cussing and cursing because data was being lost. But grew up in with the real networks mafia. Had an opportunity to incubate a company at Ignition Partners. That was the first company. Started Empire. Lots of stories on that one. Then went over to AWS and had a chance to work with Andy and Adam early on, as AWS was getting off the ground, and it's kind of incredible what it has become, shocking. And then from there, went to another startup, ended up starting another company, Square Hub, which one of the two that you talked about in terms of I had to shut that one down. And then went over to Zulily for a while and ended up then starting another company, pulling an incubation company out of Madrona. And ran that for a little bit. We ended up selling to Nordstrom, worked at Nordstrom for a little while, selling quote unquote digital shoes, and then popped over here to Leafly about a year and a half ago, a little over a year and a half. So that's kind of my professional background of 3 daughters, 3 teenage daughters, which is actually harder than any of the startups I have done. And here we are.
I only have 1 daughter, but I'll still go with you on that one. So, so you've been around the startup ecosystem in Seattle a long time, like me. Give me some observations of how it's changed a little bit before we go into a little more personal story. Just kind of curious and how because you when you sell to somebody, for those of you who don't know, you end up doing an earn-out.
Yeah.
Right. So half of those jobs are kind of like, oh, that was part of the transition team.
Right.
So, tell me how you've seen the ecosystem change over time.
Well, I mean, lots of changes in many ways, but I think one of the it felt like kind of back in the day when I first started, even when I was at Microsoft, which was 92. It was hard to start a company. I mean, the amount of capital required, because you were buying servers, you had, all this infrastructure, you were building and burning stuff on CDs. And, while it may seem, very obvious, the ability to actually start a company obviously has evolved tremendously and gotten a lot easier. I do think the rise of kind of the angel network, and as part of the reduced amount of capital to start a company, you're able to raise less and do more, which means your ability to tap into this network in Seattle, which is a very active angel network, just increases your access to capital, beyond kind of the traditional way. Things that are getting better, incrementally is, certainly seeing, more females, more individuals of color starting companies and, taking the risk. But, I think there's much, much more that I feel like this ecosystem, can do. It's interesting kind of having hit different, I guess, kind of investor pockets or technology pockets in New York and in LA, certainly a little bit in the Bay Area. We in the Northwest still sometimes don't quite have that collaborative vibe. It feels like it really takes a lot of effort for us to really spin up the kind of collaboration engine, where in some of these other towns, it's just a part of the day-to-day.
Yeah.
And we've gotten a little better, but I certainly would like to see, I'd like to see us do more in that regard.
We'll definitely come back to that topic. So I want to go back a little bit and have you talk about some of your experience first, because I think one of the things that we hear a lot in founder land is revisionist history.
Yeah.
I'm only going to tell you the good things that happened, not the craters.
Right.
So give us an example of, as a founder, where you've had some failure, or where something happened when here's something I'd love to tell my younger self.
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask that question. Yeah, I mean, what would you tell your younger self? I mean, I think that there's a lot of there's a ton of mistakes that you make that are tactical, clerical, hiring too quickly, or letting bad apples go too long because you don't want to remove them, or not understanding kind of nuances of a term sheet and all of that stuff. But I think for me, probably the biggest thing that I learned, and it was a kind of an evolved learning in those three companies, and that is the difference between being egotistical and confident. I think that in all three companies, I can think of moments where I let my ego get in the way. And when that happened, it had a multiplier effect in not only the company, but on my personal life, on my friends, my daughters, and my own mental health. And that ego thing is dangerous, and it's a super fine line between being confident, which you have to be in a startup, versus being too full of yourself and not recognizing either when you need to ask for help, or when you need to walk away, or when you need to pivot, when you need to make changes. And so when I think of the failures and kind of the root cause of things that turned into kind of clerical or transitional failures, it was because I let my ego get in the way, and that each company has kind of humbled me a lot more. But so that would be the one thing, and it's hard. It's a really hard thing to know, but man, it can be dangerous if you let it go unchecked.
Yeah, the balance. How did people around, like friends who were other founders, or how did board members, what were the positive influences on that, and what were the negative influences on it?
Well, so this is a really good question. So the first time my ego got in the way, it wasn't until it had gotten to kind of a point where it became clear I effectively needed to fire myself. The only way for us to get another round raised and to have the company continue was for me to effectively step down. And you know, the tipping point of realizing that it was my own, you know, kind of hubris that had kind of gotten in the way is when I started finally asking people for help. I think, you know, that very first company, there was something around like, I want to prove to people I can do it. I can do it. I don't want to ask for help. I can get it done. You know, you just got to believe. And the reality is like, it's really hard. It's a really big transition going from, you know, a product manager or dev manager into all of a sudden you're now responsible for people's paychecks and you're responsible for raising money and you're responsible for hiring and all these things. And I just wanted to prove that I could do it so badly that it wasn't until I started asking people and hitting my network for, hey, what the heck is even going on? Did it become clear that like it was time for me to step away. And so, you know, how I did at least take that lesson going forward is, you know, in the next two companies, I always had people around me where I would ask them, you know, I'd give them situations, I'd give them overviews of where we're at. I would walk them through how it looked like dots were connected in the rearview mirror, and I would get their assessment, and it kept me grounded. You know, you still make mistakes, of course, but it was, you know, being able to kind of, you know, put the ego in check, ask people for help, and then try to course correct was kind of the evolving of that lesson learned.
Got it. So when you look back at the impact of those ones, was it like, so you went on to kind of step out of the company, bring on your replacement as CEO, and they went on to go raise the capital? Is that, how'd that go over with you after you left?
It's hard. It was hard. It was really hard. I remember, you know, I remember kind of making the call that was going to happen. And I remember going home and laying on the bed, and I don't know, I probably cried for 2 hours straight. And it was embarrassing. I was utterly embarrassed. I was embarrassed for not only myself, my family, for just everything. And it was really hard. It was really hard. And I think I kind of carried the chip of failure for a while. You know, I was fortunate enough to, you know, have you know, to go on and work at Amazon and AWS. And so there was kind of a new rush of excitement, but man, that was was really hard. And then, you know, and congratulations to them, but, you know, they kind of refunded the company, recapped, got it going, and ended up selling it for, you know, a bunch of money. And, you know, it was in a way kind of hard to be like, oh, dang, that thing I started, but congratulations. And that's just the way it goes.
Right.
That's just the way it goes.
So how did you get your head around like, oh, I'm going to leave AWS and go start another company? Like, how did, because there's, I mean, this
ego,
this wacky entrepreneur journey is just like, woo, followed by, oh my God, I'm going to die.
Yeah, that one was really interesting because, you know, as I was leaving Amazon, I was going through a divorce, and, you know, it was just very plainly clear that, you know, you're not going to be a GM in AWS and also go through a divorce, at least for me. And so I stepped away. And one of the challenges we had at the time when the girls were young is, how do we keep everyone on the same page? And I created a company called Square Hub that effectively was a private, I guess, Facebook dedicated or targeted towards families around keeping a shared calendar, sending notes, sending photos, so that we could all kind of keep in touch. And so it kind of started with that. And, you know, I guess kind of the difference is, you know, the first time I was kind of like, I really want to start a company. With Square Hub, it was more like, no, this is really cool. Like this is really solving a problem. I was much more passionate about this particular product than I was, you know, the first go around. And so it felt a little bit different. And so that was kind of how, you know, I stumbled back into startup land of, you know, trying to address this problem. The issue is, it was a great idea. It worked for our family, but it was ridiculously hard to get other families to sign up. I mean, getting a family of 3, let alone 4, let alone 5, to do the same thing in any house is it's a challenge.
Unless it's pizza.
Unless it's pizza, exactly. And so, that was just a classic example of, we built something that was really cool, that worked for our families. And I think we, kind of naively assumed that because it worked for our families, it would work for a bunch of other families. And we didn't put enough upfront time into really determining kind of consumer demand, product market fit. Are people willing to either pay and or adopt who aren't related? And so we had a really difficult time getting traction. But that was how I stumbled into the second one.
So did you end up closing that one down or selling it? Or
Nope, close it down.
Yeah, I think for me too, I think when I look back to the first one, knowing what I know now, I wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
Because I was over-indexing on learning how to run a company versus learning how to make money for my company.
It's so...
And for me, at some point.
It's so true. Because you're just... I don't know what it is, but you're like, oh, now I'm CEO, I got to run a company. So how do you run a company? And it's like, would you just calm down? Do what you do best, which is you're a product person. So build a great product and the rest will actually, eventually fall into place. I too was so, I kind of got caught up in the, I'm now going to be a CEO. So, we've raised some money, so we need to hire a bunch of people. What are all those people going to do? I'm not totally sure yet, but we've got money. So shouldn't we open some recs? Hey, let's get some swag. That would be good. Let's do that. Let's hire a firm to develop a bunch of, logo and creative assets. For what? I don't know, but it seems like a good idea.
Progress, though. We're getting shit done. Which I laugh about today too, because I'm like, there's things you need to go do, but it's like the prioritization of like, okay, how's this going to make money, right?
Yes.
And do those things first, because then you have more money to figure out you can buy more swag, right?
Really, and it's you talk to other your first time CEOs or people who are thinking of starting companies, and you see people spending a bunch of time on the pitch deck and a bunch of time on graphics, or a bunch of time on wireframes, and you're kind of just like, you just go build something, go build the thinnest possible thing that you can that would actually get somebody who is not related to you or doesn't give a damn about you, but is interested in using the thing that you have created. Just go do that. Mm-hmm. And from there, then go get the next person.
Yeah, and that's done so much easier, cheaper and easier to do, but I'll come back to that. So if I look at the scoreboard for Dave Cotter, there's wins and losses.
Yeah.
Right? And we're not at the end of the fourth quarter yet, or we're not at the end of the game. So talk about what, as founders listening in or thinking about, like, should I go take the leap or not? Like, but knowing what you know now, what would you want to know before you take the leap?
Well, the first thing I would say is I think the leap has been awesome. While it has been painful, there has nothing that has been more rewarding from a learning curve, more rewarding in terms of the people that you meet. Mm-hmm. It is unequivocally, I think, a phenomenal experience, whether it's 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. When I look at, from investors to partners to employees, the people that you just come in contact with as a result of doing that is just incredible. I think the other thing is, it's not, I think it can seem harder than I'm going to speak out of both sides of my mouth, but it can, in many ways, I think, seem harder than it really is. And I'm not discounting that, getting capital is a layup. I'm not discounting that there, aren't ups and downs, emotional roller coasters, all that. But kind of going back to the comment of being a CEO, starting a company is, at the essence, it is, solve a problem, solve it really, really well, solve something that you're passionate about. And if you just kind of confine it to that, that's not incredibly daunting in terms of trying to say, okay, how am I going to be Rich Barton, or how am I going to be Sujal Patel? But more of just like, you're passionate about something, you want to solve this problem, go figure out the most cost-effective way to figure out if you can solve the problem and actually get paid for it or make money off of it.
Yeah.
The other thing I think I would tell people that emotionally, it is, I think in many ways, you may not be emotionally prepared for everything associated with it. There are some people who deal with it better than others, but unless you've done it, it can be an emotional roller coaster. So be prepared. You know, have your network, your friends, you know, available to ask questions. Have mentors available to pick advice or pick their brains for advice. You know, leverage a counselor. What I would tell you not to do is relative to the emotional swings and all the things and situations that come up, you know, don't rely on your family as your counselor for all the problems that you may be challenged with at work. Don't rely on them to, you know, quote unquote, be your partners. They are your family. And I think it can be super easy to just kind of come home and talk to them and lean on them. It's a big burden. It's a big emotional burden for not just you, but also your family. And so just
at the 15th and the 30th of the month when you have to make payroll and then you forget about payroll.
Yeah. So, you know, have your network in place, but, you know, I think it's a phenomenal experience. I mean, I would really encourage a lot of people to try it. Obviously, people have different financial circumstances and different risk appetites, but it's such a crazy learning experience. It really is. And
so that's the positive end of it. That's all unicorns and rainbows. And we're going to go found something. How about is it time to shut it down time question?
Oh, God. It is. You know, okay, so the other side of this coin, some of my darkest moments as a human being on this planet have been directly related to startups. I mean, and I'm not exaggerating, you know, laying on a bed for, you know, hours, you know, days upon days, staring up at the ceiling and crying, you know, falling into almost a fetal position in the corner of a conference room at our headquarters, for lack of a better word, you know, crying because funding fell through. The self-doubt's just ridiculous. You can come out of a career where you are incredibly competent, super confident in your decision-making, your judgment, you know, plop yourself into this role. And like, you know, it's almost like at times fighting off the second guessing and the paranoia. Are they going to find out I don't know what I'm doing? You know, do I even know what I'm doing? I can't believe I'm doing this. I have no idea where this is headed. Why did I do this? You know, why didn't I just stay at Amazon for, you know, 16 years? And so it really is, it really does take a lot of emotional resolve, and it can be really, really hard. And, you know, for a lot of people, it can be just, you know, game changing in terms of their, you know, kind of a emotional disposition. I mean, I'm sure that, you know, my daughters looked at me and were like, who the hell is that? You eat like crap, you don't sleep well, you look like crap. It can be not so glamorous, but I don't know, probably do it again.
So I know for me, I wrote a blog post at one point about my own personal struggle with depression as a founder. And when I hit the post button, after I hit the post button, I'm like, oh shit, what did I do? Like, I'll never get funded again. Like, I was completely honest and transparent. And it was the most read blog post I've ever written.
100%. Yeah, I certainly got into a depressive state, no question about it. And, you know, you don't realize it because you just, you know, you're just slowly but surely kind of going down. And then you cross a particular threshold and you don't even realize how far you have come. And there's just this constant struggle of like, you know, I have to just keep going. You have to just keep going. And, you've got to push, you've got to grind, you've got to keep going. And you just don't even recognize yourself because it's the adrenaline almost masquerades what frankly is, full blown, bout of depression. And that's where, that's why I think it's so important for people who are starting out that and even veterans, if you're crying out loud, if I did it again, same thing. You'd have to, really, you've got to have your network ready to help. You've got to have those people you check in with. You've got to have the confidants. Don't have it be coworkers. Don't have it be your family members. And it's just really important to check that because it can kind of turn pretty quickly, and before you know it, you're in a real battle.
Yeah, and I would encourage folks that if there's some. Definitely had a counselor and a therapist that I went to. Yep. But in business, we call them organizational development specialists.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But find somebody or reach out. And I would say reach out to me.
Yeah. Same thing. If any founder knew 5 companies in, anytime you want to pick up the phone or click on the Zoom link, I am more than happy to help. I mean, I was. There was a period of time, I was going to counselor twice a week. Yeah.
I want to shift topics a little bit. Probably for some people, it'll feel just as serious, but so within the venture capital community, 3.2% of venture capital goes to white dudes named Dave.
Exactly. As opposed to black guys named Dave.
Yeah. So, so how is it? I want to believe it's changing, but that's from my privilege. So tell me what does it look like?
Yeah. So I will start with I do think it's changing. I do think that the number of firms that are, partner or partners that are black and have, a BIPOC thesis or Latino or women thesis, there are more today than there were certainly 10, 15 years ago. So that is good. I think for me, the very first time, to be honest, it kind of hit me on the first company. And, back then, you were still talking to people on the phone and, had a couple of back and forths and some email exchanges with an investor, went down to Sand Hill Road. And I was in the lobby, somebody came and got me, sat me in the conference room, partner came in, and I shit you not, you could see just that millisecond of oh, you're Dave Cotter. Hi. And, while that was just kind of a moment in time, I do think that it wasn't until my third company, and I actually had Cross Culture Ventures, and they were was headed up by Marlon Nichols, and he's a black guy, and just the conversation, and I could feel the energy in the room. Candidly, was a little bit different, and I kind of, while it was the third company, it did kind of make me reflect a little bit of just pattern matching and the comfort level and, does or has being a black man, has that played a role in either how much money I got or how much money I didn't get. And, I think that, a lot of venture capitalists, they're very good at investors. They're very good at pattern matching. What does this thing look like? How do we understand the characteristics of this? Does it look like it could be this other thing? And, I think that seeing more companies that are funded by, women, Latino, blacks that are successful, they have successful exits and they do well for investors, I think that helps with the pattern matching machine and hopefully encourages more people. The other thing I'm also starting to see are, kind of incubators and firms that are specifically reaching out and trying to target individuals in large companies and basically offering them an on-ramp into kind of entrepreneurship. So instead of, kind of doing the, hey, just go talk to your local VC or multimillionaire, we have a program. It's a more, focused incubation program, but we're going to help you get going. And then we're also going to connect you with investors So I think it's getting better. You know, the numbers are still crap, to be honest, across the board. You know, and
on that side note, in June, so June 22nd is our next session, and Mandela Schumacher Hodge Dixon will be the guest, and Emily Carrion will hopefully be here to co-moderate with me. She had a birthday today, and her baby's due any day. And like that was chicken.
Priorities?
Yeah, I tell you. So Mandela runs Founder Gym, and Founder Gym is the program for women and Black and Brown founders, and they've raised their participants. The women have raised more $1 million Black women founders than any place else.
That's awesome.
A side note on that one, though, the negative version of that. She wrote a blog post a few years ago during one of what now looks like who knows how many police shootings about her boss that was not, you know, when something happened and her boss didn't engage and you know, asked how she was doing, things like that. And that blog post went viral twice.
Was
Dave is I was the boss.
The boss. Yes.
That was me.
Really?
I was, yeah.
I
didn't know, you know, it is not an excuse, right? But I think the not knowing what to do thing.
Yeah. You know,
she and I have talked about it since then, but it's tragic when something goes viral and it's about you and you're the bad actor in it.
Well, but I think that the, you know, whether you were the, you know, antagonist in the story, the story still needed to be told. And, you know, I do think that, you know, over the last year, you know, the George Floyd protests last summer were really quite fascinating in terms of, you know, other, you know, startup VCs, CEOs, et cetera, you know, genuinely reached out and were like, you know, we need to do better. And it was really quite, you know, obviously there's a lot more to do, but, you know, it was really the first time where people were using phrases like, you know, anti-racism. You know, they were talking about, you know, gender equality, anti-sexism, you know, anti-Semitic. Like, it wasn't kind of folded into diversity and inclusion. Right. It was much more hard-hitting, much more direct. And I think that, you know, for us in the tech community, you know, the most important thing that we can try to do is fund more companies that actually have women, Latino, and Blacks as leaders, so that as their companies flourish and little kids are, you know, seeing who's the CEO here and who's behind this, you know, next $1 billion company, they see people that look like them, and they are, you know, as from the mouth of babes. Well, if that person can do it, I must be able to do it because they look like me. Yep. And you know, I think it's also going to take us to make more significant investments in education and access, so that, you know, access to technology, access to broadband is, you know, much more evenly distributed. So at least there's the opportunity for, you know, a child who is interested in technology at least has the opportunity to, you know, to exercise that muscle. So
I want to shift a little bit into, you got a lot of things on your plate with 3 teenage daughters.
Yeah.
You're a product manager.
Yeah.
You clearly don't know how to say no.
I know. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So how do you practically balance your time today, and what are you most excited about right now? Because I know for those who don't know, Dave just became the new board chair for WTIA.
Yeah.
Taking over for Heather Redmond, which was not an easy role to fill.
No, not at all. Well, I'll tell you, like, I guess I'll tell you kind of how I balance my day, and I guess kind of what I'm excited about. So I wake up very early. I usually wake up around 4:30. I usually go running with the dog around Green Lake. And, you know, I'm back showered and at the computer by 6:45 or 7. I usually try to spend about 45 minutes right out of the gate actually catching up on personal email or just kind of personal related stuff. A lot of times it's replying to my daughter's emails or text messages around, you know, hey, I need more money. And then, you know, certainly kind of jump into just day in life at Leafly. And then, you know, on the side, kind of also, you know, working with, you know, Schutzler and Heather and the rest of the exec committee on thinking about what's the next arc of the WTIA. The two things that, maybe three things, but I guess the two things that I'm pretty excited about right now is, I am excited about kind of the WTIA and what it can do at this particular moment in time. And I know this sounds like a plug, people, but it's not. But we're at an interesting crossroads as an organization in terms of, not only representing the companies, but how do we represent all the tech workers? How do we come to grips with the fact that, the city, and the tech community sometimes are at odds, both at a, executive leadership level all the way to, housing displacement, where all of a sudden people who have lived in neighborhoods no longer can live there because, homes are selling for 1.5 million with no inspection. How do we repair, the relationship with, governments? How do we provide access? So I get excited about what the WTA can do. And I really hope we can use this as an opportunity to kind of hopefully bridge some gaps. So I am excited about that. And I'm also excited about, I'm excited about my company. I think that Leafly, as a cannabis company, it's kind of fascinating to think that here we are where we're on the precipice of, kind of more probably federal legalization, but certainly more states. But, the thing that has been really interesting about the cannabis space is just, the war on drugs, the social equity piece, and how, it still is such an awesome opportunity, but yet it still is not accessible to a lot of minorities. And in fact, and just the impact that the war on drugs has had. So I get excited about those two things. Yeah, my kids, I get excited about them as well, but
Well, so I'm going to open it up for some Q&A from the audience here in a sec. But I want to ask one more question before we do, which is, how do you explain to your daughters that you took a job in the cannabis industry?
Actually, so they each had slightly different reactions. So my 22-year-old daughter, I didn't have to explain it because she knew about Leafly long before I did and couldn't be more excited. My 18-year-old was like, yeah, whatever, I don't care. And my 16-year-old just loves to call me either the dope man or the pot man. And so, they think it's actually, they think it's pretty funny actually. But they also recognize that cannabis could have a real powerful impact on, society once we hit federal legalization. So, but
which is still probably quite. Who knows?
I mean, kind of who knows? I think it really depends. Do you try to jam it through before the midterms or what? I will tell you this: my mom had a hell of a time reconciling. You're doing what? Why did you do that?
Right.
We raised you better than that, or at least we thought we did. I'm like, no, you didn't actually.
How does she feel about it today?
She feels better about it today. It's almost. I think it took her some processing time, and for her to just understand that this isn't, this isn't a company that's, selling weed, behind, somebody's house, that it's, it's as much a technology company as it is, a cannabis company. And I'm doing much of the same things I do, at Leafly as I did at any other technology company. So I think once she got her head around that, she's like, oh, okay.
So still a little, but
I doubt she's going to be dipping into any of our products.
She hasn't downloaded the app, or she's not using the license.
Yeah, I don't think she's going to be jumping into the strains database.
All right, well, it could happen. You never know.
It very much could.
I want to open it up for questions. There's a questions button over there at the far right lower side, and we'll see how this goes. And so feel free to ask the question there, and I'll repeat it for you. Or Callie, if you think you can handle this better, feel free. But yeah, if you have questions for Dave, now's a great chance to ask him, because I have more, but I'm going to open it up for you.
I promise I'll answer truthfully.
You're talking about that Meghan Markle interview about trying not to make you cry. That's the important thing.
Exactly.
So, all right, well, while we wait for somebody to type those long questions in.
Yes.
Product roadmap today at a funded company versus product roadmap as a founder CEO. What's the because your team's probably just as big as some of the startups you ran.
Yeah.
How are you working on product roadmap, and how do you think about the problem space that you're in today versus when you're doing it the earliest?
That's a really good question. So I think probably the biggest difference is, today's product roadmap is, is really around trade-offs, levels of investment, and measured returns. Whereas the product roadmap for a startup is kind of like, finish it, ship something, or immediately respond to customers or a customer. Maybe even this makes the broader point, which is there really is kind of no roadmap. I think you have milestones that you're effectively trying to hit that have product roadmap elements, whether it could be number of customers, it could be usage, it could be engagement. But like the startups, when they were small, we didn't have a product roadmap. It was just like, just build some stuff,
right?
Feedback and make it better,
right?
Versus now it is, we've got about 60 some people, and so it's like, okay, we have investments that we need to make. We have multiple stakeholders, multiple market opportunities. We need to make trade-offs, and so it takes a very different view in terms of even structure, in terms of planning and trade-offs, versus back in the day. It's like you got to get it done
right
now.
That's the customers can respond. So
yeah.
Emily Chang's asking a question here: is what is the best way to talk about and incorporate diversity and inclusion into building a company, as well as a value in the company with co-founders?
Well, I'm going to kind of borrow, my response is going to kind of borrow from the Netflix playbook, which is a company's culture is determined based on who they hire, who they fire, who gets promoted, and who doesn't. And I think that when it comes to diversity and inclusion, especially at a younger company, the more, the earlier on you were able to recognize the value and the power of a diverse, kind of team. And that diversity, can be everything from, making certain you have women, making certain you have people of color, any sort of diversity is really, really critical. And the sooner you start kind of just having that be the norm, the less of a specific process, project, or, program that has to be instilled at a later date. It sometimes can be difficult depending on either the roles you're trying to fill, but I would say, as soon as you possibly can, I would, make the effort to have as diverse a workforce as early on as you possibly can, because that will then set the tone, and you won't need a diversity and inclusion program because it's just a part of your DNA.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, I'd encourage folks to look at who do you bring on in that independent board position.
Yes.
Right, because it's like there's a leadership role on your team that isn't an executive that you can bring in. You need a VP of marketing.
Yes.
You can hire a great board member who's a VP of marketing or CMO, or right. So go look for roles that you maybe couldn't afford to hire, but they're going to have great influence on the executive.
100%. That's totally spot on. Totally spot on. It's a good answer.
Jonathan asks this question: could you briefly describe a typical day project you're working on? Right
now?
Yeah.
Typical day? Oh gosh. Typical day is, I could show you my calendar, back-to-back meetings. So if I even just kind of, think about today. So today started off with an 8 o'clock meeting with our head of HR to review headcount and on-ramping and sequencing. I then had a one-on-one with a senior director of PM. I then had a one-on-one with our chief revenue officer. We then had about a 14-person dev team meeting to talk about potentially making a notable product change. I then had a product engineering and design all hands meeting. We then have our scrum of scrums across the company. I then had an hour-long core leadership meeting, which essentially is our CEO, chief revenue officer, and marketing. I then had a one-on-one with our finance director. And then I had a set of office hours for people to talk through or answer questions around bonus and approvals. So, most of the day is spent with the teams, talking about the team, or talking with the teams on either, yes, we're going to do this, no, we're not going to do that. Why the heck did we do it this way? it's a lot of it is, and I love it. A lot of it is, well, put it this way. I think as a manager of a manager or manager of managers, one of the most critical things to do is it's less about swooping in and managing the people, but managing the patterns. And so getting with the teams and getting updates from individuals, I'm constantly kind of looking for patterns for, are we hitting our dates or are we estimating correctly? Are we being clear in our product requirements so that we can figure out actually how to measure this stuff? Are we being bold enough? We are not going to bunt our way to being a publicly traded company. And so how are we thinking, and are we, pushing ourselves, and are we expanding our risk appetite? So I see my job, and I spend the day trying to look for patterns and trying to course correct the things that I think would help reestablish the right pattern and right behaviors. But that's how I spend most of my day, in a lot of meetings with the intent of trying to look for patterns. I try not to jump in and solve problems unless I have to.
That was a hard one.
Super hard.
So in that context, I'm a new founder. I have a young company. I'm doing my own startup. Like I'm a big community guy, and people are always like, I should be involved in the community. I'm not going to weigh in on this one. I'm going to ask you, when should you get involved with the community? What makes sense from a timing, practical perspective?
Well, it's interesting because as you were saying that, I was kind of like, maybe what is our definition of community? Because I would say, as soon as you possibly can, as soon as you can talk to another co-founder, or excuse me, another founder of another company, have a conversation. I just think that, like, at a minimum, you will at least hear somebody who says, yeah, it's hard. Yeah, I get it. It's stressed. And you'll at least feel that you're not completely alone and probably second guessing or wondering why the heck you did what you did. But I think that, like, there's kind of like leveraging individuals in the community, like whether you contact Dave or contact me. And then there is kind of what's your give back to the community. I think as a first time or a second time entrepreneur, you should be as, you should be as greedy as possible and get as much information as you can from people who've been in this community and have done stuff. And then it's your job that, as you get older and get more seasoned, it's your job then to turn that back around and make yourself available to people that are, going to be traveling in the same shoes that you've already worn a couple of times. And the communities kind of happen organically. Sometimes it's small, sometimes they get a little bit larger, but it doesn't have to be, I'm going to go to this event or go to this event. Just find somebody and just start talking, and it'll happen organically.
So Aaron has asked the question here, what's your point of view on ways to increase BIPOC ownership leadership in the cannabis industry in Washington?
Oh, goodness gracious. Well, that's a really tough one because the legal framework in Washington doesn't have any social justice or equity measures built into it. So a license, a dispensary and a license is essentially, up for grabs. Things that the community should be doing is, because it's not federally legal, you don't have access to the normal routes of capital. So you can't go get a bank loan. It's difficult to get kind of venture funding for a lot of the cannabis companies. So, things that we have started to do is work with companies who effectively are making capital available. Because unless you're actually dipping into your own savings, your own personal wealth, it can be very difficult. Even if you're fortunate to get a cannabis license, how do I get this thing funded? So first and foremost, trying to increase capital and make capital available to cannabis dispensaries or BIPOC owners. Also on our platform, trying to highlight and drive traffic to those dispensaries or those brands. So trying to make certain that we can do as much as we possibly can in pushing traffic, whether it's foot or digital traffic, to their respective sites, so that they actually can get a basic flywheel going for their business. So those are some of the initial things. There's a long way and a lot of work to do. New York did a pretty good job. We will see how it kind of plays out, but at least their legalization framework actually has very specific, ownership and distribution of licenses across the entire spectrum, so that we don't end up in a world where all the cannabis licenses are effectively purchased by former, tech individuals who have a lot of money and just want to get into the weed space.
Right. Yeah, each state's going to be different, and it's kind of crazy.
It is. And, the federal, one of the big upsides with federal legalization is that, that will allow for traditional loans to be available. Now, that doesn't mean, obviously, if you look at, distribution of loans, still, Blacks and Latinos are disproportionately underrepresented, but at least you could have access to some of the traditional routes. Today, you just don't.
Right.
You hit up your family, you hit up your own checkbook,
right.
And that can be really difficult. And also, just as I was saying earlier, just the war on drugs has taken a really tremendously huge toll on Black families in many of the states. California, being obviously the worst, and that too has just really decimated the ability for dispensaries or even brands to be run and fun.
Right. Well, we got room for a couple more questions for folks online, so feel free to ask those too. As you look at coming back out of COVID, you've got a big team you're managing now. Are you guys going back to the office anytime soon?
Great question. So right now we're effectively, at least through the end of the summer, letting people work from home. We will probably set up smaller offices as opposed to having kind of the big office. It's almost we're kind of leaning towards on-sites where you have office space that would allow for people to effectively come back. We also have heard from our employees that a lot of them, relative, I suppose, to see kind of level of vaccination, are still very gun shy. And still have concerns. And so what we have found productivity wise, we've actually been able to maintain and in some instances exceed some of the productivity. What you miss though is the kind of the osmosis, the organic, in the hallway conversation, the body language and facial expressions can feel very different on a Zoom call versus when you're in the room with somebody. Ad hoc collaboration and problem solving, kind of gets missed. And so we will eventually come back to I guess, effectively a hybrid situation. But we're trying to be really mindful of what makes sense for our employees as opposed to kind of force something on them too soon.
So last one here, super curious. Obviously, the cannabis industry is super interesting for you.
Yep.
What other industry segments, like if you were a founder going like, I'm looking for an idea, okay, what categories would you be like, oh, I'd be super curious about that one, or I'd look there, I was like, I don't know if I'd go there or not. What's some of the ones that are interesting to you?
I mean, joint pain for old men who run around Green Lake.
I think you found it in the joint.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I will say this. I mean, I think that there's still, if you're trying to think of ideas, I mean, I'm gonna pull an old Buffett thing, which is, there's a lot of just kind of, there's a lot of problems, and there's a lot of things that are being solved in a physical manner today. Many of those could be, made much more efficient with the use of technology. I think things to look at is, Clubhouse is obviously a super gross example, but how are people communicating? I think the education sector has just gone through this radical transformation.
Who would have thought that ed tech could have been sexy a year and a half ago? Oh my God.
So, I look at, and I've kind of thought about this a little bit, but, I look at how my daughters study, and it's fascinating because they get on FaceTime calls with each other, and their phone is usually sitting kind of right by their computer with either one or two individuals on it, and they're all effectively kind of doing their homework together. And it's just, it just felt like, okay, I wonder if there's something there around how kids actually do homework with each other. So I think, obviously just coming out of COVID, education. It feels like there's a lot of different ways. And that includes also just, how people learn or how kids learn and consume information, I think is super interesting. I'm not super great at I would never have come up with TikTok. So
yeah, B2C ones are just not, I'm not in the target audience, I don't think so.
I would not have come up with Clubhouse. I don't even really?
Well, Kelly, on that note, I'm going to turn it back over to you and shift us into whatever you have next for us in the dialogue. Dave, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Of course. Thank you so much.
I look forward to having the adult beverage at some point again.
Very much, sir.
I won't be running around green like if you see a guy on a bike, it might be.
Exactly. I'll look for you at 4:45 tomorrow.
Exactly. All right, Kelly, it's over to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys both so much for your time this evening. And